So I have to be honest, at first it made me kind of uncomfortable. Well, not sure that's quite it. Maybe it's better to say I didn't know what to do with it. See, at First Unitarian, we have a growing American Sign Language kind of group and ministry on Saturdays. And we have hired 2 deaf coordinators, membership coordinators. Rupert is deaf, and Brooke, his partner, is hearing. Now, I gotta say, each week I meet with them to kind of learn more about the deaf culture and work on my, you can tell I'm doing this, work on my sign language skills, how to converse and chat and laugh and share some stories with one another. We have an emerging friendship, and I'm very grateful and feel blessed that I get this time with them every week. So after one of those lessons, to show my gratitude, I stood up and did what Kaaren does, right? I hugged Rupert. And it was your standard, average kind of dinky hug. I mean, you know, the hug we all do as human beings. You know, the kind you reach over and kind of pat somebody's shoulder and you hug them, but you do the triangle hug kind of thing. You know what I'm talking about? Come on, I can't be the only one who does, right? Okay, so anyway, I get done with that hug, and Rupert pulls back from me, and he goes like this, and he gives me this hug. I already told her she's my guinea pig today. This is what he did. When he was done hugging me like that for the first time, he looked at me post-hug and he says, "That is how deaf people hug when they are connected to someone." Now, what made me uncomfortable wasn't really all that bodily contact, but you really are like flat on to somebody. It was this deep connection that was in that hug. And that hug got me in touch with my own, I think, yearning, that deep longing we all have for deeper kind of connection with other people. When I asked Brooke and Rupert to share with me what's behind that kind of hug within deaf culture, Rupert wrote this to me. He said, "Since deaf people share more personal information more quickly, it then feels wrong to shake someone's hand. There are studies that show how much more invested the person is in any kind of relationship after any kind of physical contact. The more contact there is, the more the person becomes a human being to the other one." Now, Brooke added to what Rupert had wrote. Now, remember, she's hearing, and she wrote this. She said, "I do think that deaf people in general have less opportunity for meaningful interactions with people. So when they have the opportunity to really get to know and exchange personal and meaningful information, they want to follow it up with something like a full body hug to you that says, hey, we're both human. We are in this together. You are not alone." And that line, I think, gets at the heart of what I'm after today. Tell me you don't yearn for those moments when we are assured that we are in this together, when you know you are not alone in the world. Those moments of connection, I think, are something we all yearn for. And today I want to actually talk about that connection, that yearning, as yearning for love, moments of love. I was reminded of 2 things recently. One is a statistic that always haunts me when I come upon it and I get startled by it. At this point, I don't even remember who did the work behind it, but I always remember the question and the answer to it. So the question was posed to Americans. They said, how many people do you have in your life that you can share important parts of your life with them? You know, things like your longings and your hopes, your dreams, your sorrows, your worries, your anxiety, your passion. 40 years ago, the answer to that question was 6 people. Now, in American culture right now, the answer to that question is 1.5 people. Now, what's even more startling about that is that's not the average answer most people give. The average answer is 0. 0. How can we not talk about that, friends? That's frightening. It's unnerving and a haunting statistic. On top of that, I want to add this other quote I came upon that says, the opposite of love is not hate, but isolation. The opposite of love is not hate, but isolation. So both the survey and the quote, the opposite of love is not hate, but isolation, drew me to this writer, this researcher I'm kind of enthralled with. Her name is Barbara Fredrickson, and she just wrote a book called Love 2.0, How Our Supreme Emotion Affects Everything We Feel, Think, Do, and Become. Now, Fredrickson's book reveals a new way about thinking about love. Simply put, she wants us to love more, and she claims that part of the reason we don't love more is due to the way that we think about love. The problem, according to her, is we make love both too small and too big at the same time. In other words, we have an operating system around love that is 1.0. This is about as technical as I get today, okay? And our 1.0 version of love is too small in the sense that we limit love to special relationships, to our family, to our partner, to our friends, and that's how small it is, though. Too big in the sense that love is something that is thought of as this kind of magical feeling that comes off for you, an all-encompassing feeling that makes us feel like we are that one special person in the world to one other person in the world. But she would argue that love is not about being the most special person in the world to somebody or relegated to a select few. Instead, love is simply any moment where we are given the gift of being pulled out of our isolation into connection with someone else. Now here's where she brings in, actually in her book, all this brain research and biochemistry and DNA and cell development, which is very interesting, but it doesn't really get to my point today. Instead, I want to cut to the chase and kind of lift up her conclusion. She wants us to see love as micro moments of connection that thereby make love more accessible and manageable, enabling us to love more often. She wants us to upgrade our love to 2.0 love, okay? And after reading her work this week, I realized she radically opened up the idea of love for me. I don't think really that our deepest longing, our deepest yearning, is to have this magical feeling of love that results in feeling like we are the one special person in the world to another that is unconditional or constant or familial. No, now I believe that what we long for is simply to not feel isolated and alone. To use Brooke's words, who was talking about that hug within the deaf culture, she said this, hey, remember, we are both human. We are in this together. You're not alone. And sure, what can happen with special people in our lives after years of building trust and intimacy? That can happen, those connections, of course. But it also can happen at moments with strangers through simple acts of connection. Love is something we can give at any time. See, when I put Fredrickson's book down, 2 things occurred to me. One is, that it's not that hard to make other people feel loved. It's just not, really. And the other thing that came to me, and this is going to sound kind of silly, but that Nike ad, just do it. Seriously, I saw Nike in front of me. But I think there are 3 lessons involved in how to tease out her kind of 2.0 version of looking at love. The first is this. I want to start with a researcher who started the Love Lab, as he called it, at the University of Washington. His name is John Gutterman. Now, Gutterman started this lab in order to kind of analyze what made a couple stay together, right? And they were under the idea that if they watched couples for a weekend, and they'd have them come into this lab and they were in front of, a big glass piece and they videotaped them all weekend, they thought that watching these couples come in all the time, that they would have these moments. This is what was thought that would make a marriage stay together, that they would observe moments of really kind of like deep sharing, self-disclosure, intimate details, hopes and dreams and fears. Now, Gutterman expected, of course, to document that. But lo and behold, the experiment was a complete failure in all of their minds. Because as they had these couples come in and they watched them and videotaped them, basically what they did all weekend while they filmed them was they did chit-chat. They talked about things like the news and, do you want coffee or orange juice this morning? Do you help the kids with their homework? Family updates, basically just chit-chat. So the researchers go back and they look at the film and they keep looking at it, and they realize that there's a difference in the chit-chat between some couples and other couples. Now, Gutterman called these kind of pieces that he was saying, he said that a couple that ultimately lasted together saw exchanges not as communication between the two of them, but as moments to connect with one another. And Gutterman called these efforts to connect, he called them bids, that you're putting bids out in the world with each other. In other words, did the couple's communication make them turn toward each other and connect, or did their communication make them turn away from each other and feel disconnected and lonely? So he gives some examples. Here's one. A husband might say, do you want some coffee, right? A wife might respond, yes, dear, I'd love some. That's a bid, right? Okay? This is not a bid. Or a wife might respond with a different tone. Nose in the paper and ignore the offer for coffee, or might even say something like, I'll take coffee as long as you won't complain you're being my servant. That is not a bid, okay? You got these clear? Here's another example. A wife might say, what do you think of this dress? Come on, that's a trick question, don't you think? Okay, but a husband could say back to that, it's lovely as ever. What tie do you recommend that I wear? That's a bid, right? This is not a bid. Husband might respond with a different tone, something like, it looks fine, whatever, we have to go. Or, here's the trap again. If you want a compliment, can't you just ask for it? Not a bid. In the end, what became almost the perfect marker of whether or not a couple would stay together 6 to 10 years down the road, almost a perfect marker, 92% of the time, was whether or not couples, not all the time, but most of the time, did they give bids to each other. Then they stayed together. If most of the time, they gave a few bids, but most of the time they were turning away from each other, they were isolating one another from each other, then they did not stay together in the end. Now, Gutterman's idea of bids gets to Fredrickson's idea of micro moments of connection and love. The bids really are small things you can offer a spouse. But in truth, it seems to me we can offer bids to anyone at any time. They need not be contained to our spouse or our partner. In fact, we can take these bids, these micro moments of connection, and practice them each day in the workplace, with our friends and our neighbors, our co-workers, and our children. And they will indeed transform your day. You see, in my opinion, we have people doing this to us all the time, if you pay attention, reaching out to us all the time, offering us micro moments of love and connection. And in turn, offering bids to others isn't that hard to do either. In fact, it is a little thing to do, a small effort with a really big consequence of ultimately what keeps us and others from feeling lonely and isolated from one another. So offer bids to stranger and friend and upgrade your love to 2.0. Point number 2. This last week, Reverend Tina Simpson at First Unitarian sent me this little link to a video that the company Dove made. You know, they make soap. You know who I'm talking about? And it was a 6-minute video. And I clicked on it, and at the end, I was sobbing. And it's really short, but it hit hard. It's really simple in its delivery and approach. But what it is it starts off with this large room, like a big loft space. And in the loft space is a guy who is a sketch artist. He worked for the FBI for a while. He worked for the Los Angeles Police Department. And he is sitting at a sketch table facing this way. And before him is his sketch pad. And then his back is to the door. So in walk a number of women. And he's facing this way. They are sitting this way. They're back to back, okay? And they have a curtain between the two of them. And the first thing that they ask every woman who sits down is, can you describe yourself to me so I can sketch you? And what happens is he goes about sketching all of these women as they describe what they look like. Now, all the women, no matter what their age or race was, said often, frequently things like this. My mom told me I had a big jaw. I kind of have a fat, rounder face. I'd say I have a pretty big forehead. Okay? Now, earlier in the day, the women were asked to sit down with the stranger and just have a conversation for 15 minutes, but they were not told, neither one of the parties were told why. Later in the day, the person who had sat with the woman, right, he or she comes in and they describe what that woman looks like to the sketch artist. Okay, so you're getting a stranger's version of somebody, 15 minutes, having the sketch artist write it. And the stranger often described the women by saying things like, her eyes light up when she talks, she has kind eyes, an elegant chin, thick, beautiful hair. She seems like someone I'd really like to get to know. Again, in the end, each woman then is left with 2 different sketches of themselves. One that they described, and one that a stranger described. What is revealing in the end is both sad and enlightening, and you have this underneath your chair, so I invite you to take one out. I want you to turn to the first one, which is Kayla. The one on the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, is her self-description of herself. The one on the left is what the stranger saw her to be. Now turn it over. Florence. Florence is how she describes herself, right? And how the stranger drew her. Now each woman came back into the room and looked at their drawings of themselves. Now what hit me most was how when the women described their own features, they gave details of themselves that was much harsher than actually they were, and in fact often untrue about who they were. When the other person described them, they described the woman as being animated or larger than their physical features, of having beauty that came forth not just in who and what they looked like, but in who they were. And in each case, with each drawing down to the T, from 20-year-olds all the way up to 60-year-olds. Take a gander at which one is almost an exact snapshot of what the woman actually looked like. Who is it? The stranger. every single time. What got me, I think, is all the women, when describing themselves, were stuck in the isolation of their physical beauty, stuck in some expectation they had, or they felt society had related to their worth. But each stranger offered each one of those women something very, very simple. And it was a powerful act. What a small, powerful act to say to someone, "You have kind eyes." This one woman commented, looking at her picture, she said, "The woman here," she said, "I have some work to do." It seems to me, these little bits, these little micro moments of connection and love, we need to hear them. We need to let them sink in. We need to receive them. Lesson number 2. We need to receive them better in order to let love in and upgrade to love 2.0. Lesson 3. There is another little video on TED TV that's put together by a woman named Hannah Bredker. And it's 6 minutes as well. And Scott included it in the Soul Matters packet for Yearning this month. But Hannah says she came from a family that her parents did not call her up. They didn't IM on the computer. They didn't text each other, none of that. Her mother wrote her letters all the time. Just handwritten snail mail letters. She said she was the only kid in college who actually waited by the mailbox in order to get a letter and communication from her parents, right? And she is probably the only one in her generation that actually has something physically as a love letter, because everything else is exchanged by a digital manner and nobody has any record of it, right? So she says that she got these love letters all through college from her mother. And then she moved to New York City. And she got kind of sideswiped after college with this feeling of just depression and isolation and loneliness. So in order to kind of connect, she did what she knew best. She started writing love letters to strangers. She would leave them in cafes and in coffee shops. She would leave them while she was waiting for the bus on the seat for anybody to take. She did a lot of work in the UN library and left them in between books there for other people to find. And then one day, she promises on the internet, one night before she goes to bed, she promises anybody around the world who needs a love letter, somebody to remind them that they are of worth, she will write a handwritten letter to them. The next day, she has so many offers. She starts off on her inbox is completely full. And she has started an organization called The World Needs More Love Letters. And she continues on this practice. But what's so great about the practice is that other people around the world have kind of picked it up and used it for themselves. For instance, this woman, a woman whose husband just came back from Afghanistan and is having a hard time kind of unearthing this thing called conversation. So she tucks love letters throughout the house as a way of saying, "Come back to me, find me when you can." Another young woman started it on a campus in Dubuque, Iowa, who was feeling lonely and isolated. She did it for months at a time. And then, left them in nooks and crannies to all the strangers on campus. And then one day comes out of her dorm room, and there are love letters hanging from all the trees around her dorm and all over on the lawn and stuffed into various places. Now here's the thing, right? Hannah, in the midst of her isolation and loneliness, did what? She created little love and acts of connection and found herself surrounded by love. Her letters are clear, and they're not schmaltzy kind of or romantic at all, really. They are all letters of reminding people that you are of worth just for being you. She is making a bid to others. She is offering little micro moments of love. She is working with the Love 2.0 operating system. We are a lonely and isolated species. Sometimes, more often, we feel that way, and we do at others, but all of us, at times, have felt lonely and isolated. If anything, I want you to walk away today with this. I want you to remember that love need not be too small, that it is only relegated to your family, or too large, that it's just for us and one other person. I want you to remember the opposite of love is not hate, it's isolation. And friends, it doesn't take that much, just a daily practice of, well, just do it. Give and receive love. Offer yourself to another. Love is gained, given, and received in small acts, drops in the bucket, micro moments that can fill us and fulfill us and connect us, one another, out of our loneliness. So I want you to start and just do it, but I also understand that it's not always easy to do it without some encouragement from someplace else. So I know you need to receive before you can give. So I asked numerous people at First Unitarian last week and for this week to write all of you a love letter. And they had full intention of being able to connect with you and share their love of humanity with you as well, and reminding you that you are of worth. You're a gift to the world. So they're written with care. Some are quite humorous, some are pretty straightforward. But I want you to hold them and have them for a while. I want you to bring them home and open them, look at them again, make them dog-eared and tired. And when you are ready, I want you to start some daily practice, some practice of bids or micro moments of connection that is distinctly yours, that indeed can carry you and others out of loneliness and isolation. Take home the love letter gift. And by the way, I had 600 of these last weekend, and every single one of them was gone. So I want you got to leave today with one of these. Will you promise me that? I want you just to meditate on that. The buckets, those little pieces of love that is yours today and tomorrow and next week and next year. Then upgrade your operating system to 2.0 and give away in micro moments or in bids to others and heal your isolation. May it be so. Amen.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.